The instructors told her she would never make it through Airborne school. Her left leg, weakened by a childhood accident, would never handle the landing impact. But when Staff Sergeant Falcon Rodriguez stepped out of that aircraft at 30,000 feet in complete darkness, what she did next would be talked about in military circles for decades. The jump that everyone said was impossible became the jump that saved an entire special operations team and changed the history of warfare itself. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from today. And if you believe stories of courage against impossible odds deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. You make this community what it is. Fort Benning, Georgia. The United States Army Airborne School, where soldiers learn to jump from perfectly good airplanes and somehow land safely on the ground. It's a place where physical perfection is not just preferred, it's required. Every muscle, every bone, every reflex must function at peak performance to survive the brutal impact of military parachuting, which is why nobody understood how Staff Sergeant Falcon Rodriguez had been accepted into the program. Falcon's left leg bore the scars of a childhood accident that had left her with a permanent limp and reduced strength in her lower extremity. The injury had happened when she was 12 years old, a car accident that shattered her femur and damaged the surrounding muscles so severely that doctors told her she would never run normally again, let alone serve in the military. But Falcon Rodriguez had spent the last 15 years proving doctors wrong. She had not only enlisted in the Army, but had excelled in every phase of training. Her test scores were exceptional, her leadership abilities were outstanding, and her determination was legendary among her peers. But when she applied for airborne training, the Medical Review Board had initially rejected her application based on her physical limitations. The rejection had been overturned only after the intervention of Colonel David Martinez, who had served with Falcon in Afghanistan and had witnessed firsthand her extraordinary capabilities as a soldier. Martinez had argued that Falcon's mental toughness and tactical skills more than compensated for any physical limitations, and he had used his considerable influence to get her accepted into airborne school. But getting accepted was one thing. Surviving the training was something else entirely. The first week of airborne school was designed to weed out soldiers who didn't have the physical or mental toughness to be paratroopers. The training was intentionally brutal, with instructors who seemed to take personal pleasure in finding reasons to dismiss candidates from the program. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Thompson was the lead instructor for Falcon's class, and he had made it clear from day one that he didn't believe she belonged there. Rodriguez. Thompson's voice cut across the training field like a whip crack as Falcon struggled to complete a series of landing drills. The impact exercises were designed to simulate the shock of parachute landings, and Falcon's weakened leg was causing her to lose her balance on nearly every repetition. "Sir!" Falcon snapped to attention, sweat streaming down her face despite the cool Georgia morning. "Rodriguez, what makes you think you can be a paratrooper when you can't even land on your feet during a simple drill?" Falcon's jaw tightened, but she maintained her military bearing. "Sir, I will continue to train until I meet the standard, sir." Thompson walked closer, his voice loud enough for the entire class to hear. "Rodriguez, I've seen your medical file. That leg of yours is held together with pins and screws. What happens when you land hard in combat and it gives out? What happens when your team is depending on you and you can't move because your hardware fails?" The other students watched in uncomfortable silence as Thompson continued his verbal assault. "Rodriguez, I'm going to save you some time and embarrassment. Drop out now, before you get hurt or get someone else killed. Find a nice, safe job in logistics where your limitations won't put other soldiers at risk." Falcon felt every eye in the training area on her, felt the weight of their expectations and Thompson's contempt. But she also felt something else, the same burning determination that carried her through 15 years of proving people wrong. "Sir, I respectfully request to continue training, sir." Thompson's smile was cold. "Fine, Rodriguez. But when you wash out, and you will wash out, remember that I gave you the chance to leave with dignity." What Thompson didn't know was that Falcon Rodriguez had no intention of washing out. What he also didn't know was that she had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone realized. For the past 3 years, Falcon had been conducting unauthorized parachute jumps in her spare time, working with civilian instructors who specialize in adaptive techniques for disabled skydivers. She had learned to compensate for her leg weakness through modified landing techniques and had developed core strength that far exceeded what most paratroopers possess. But more importantly, Falcon had been studying advanced parachuting techniques that went far beyond what was taught in basic airborne school. She had researched halo, high-altitude, low-opening jumps, military freefall procedures, and special operations insertion techniques with the obsessive focus of someone who knew that her physical limitations meant she had to be better than everyone else just to be considered equal. The second week of Airborne school brought the students to their first actual jumps from aircraft. These were basic static line jumps from 1,200 feet. Relatively safe exercises designed to introduce soldiers to the experience of exiting an aircraft and deploying a parachute. Falcon's first jump was a disaster. Her exit from the aircraft was technically correct, but her weakened leg caused her to favor her right side during the descent, creating an unbalanced landing that sent her tumbling across the drop zone. She completed the jump safely, but her form was so poor that Thompson marked it as a failure. "Rodriguez!" Thompson's voice boomed across the drop zone as Falcon gathered her parachute. "That was the worst jump I've seen in 15 years of instruction. You're lucky you didn't break your neck." Falcon's second jump was marginally better, but still resulted in a hard landing that left her limping for the rest of the day. Thompson marked it as a barely passing performance, making it clear that one more failure would result in her dismissal from the program. That night, alone in her barracks, Falcon made a decision that would change everything. She was going to prove that her limitations were actually advantages, but she couldn't do it within the constraints of basic airborne training. She needed to demonstrate capabilities that went far beyond what Thompson expected from his students. Falcon had maintained contact with Marcus Webb, a former special operations soldier who now worked as a civilian contractor training advanced parachuting techniques. Webb had been helping her develop adaptive jumping methods, and he had mentioned that he was conducting night training exercises just outside the Fort Benning area. That weekend, Falcon drove to Webb's training facility for what she told herself would be her final preparation before attempting to complete airborne school. But what Webb proposed was far more ambitious than anything she considered. "Falcon," Webb said as they prepared for a sunset jump, "I've been thinking about your situation at Benning. The instructors there are looking at your limitations instead of your capabilities." Webb gestured toward a specialized parachute rig that Falcon had never seen before. "What if I told you there was a way to demonstrate skills that would make those basic airborne jumps look like child's play?" Falcon examined the equipment with growing interest. It was clearly military-grade gear, but far more advanced than anything used in standard airborne training. "What kind of skills?" she asked. Webb smiled. "Halo jumping, high altitude, low opening, the kind of insertion technique used by the most elite special operations units in the world." Falcon felt her pulse quickening. Halo jumping was considered one of the most dangerous and technically demanding forms of military parachuting. Jumpers exited aircraft at altitudes above 25,000 feet, fell in free fall for extended periods, and opened their parachutes at extremely low altitudes to avoid detection. "Marcus, I've never done anything like that. And besides, I'm not qualified for that kind of training." Webb's expression became serious. "Falcon, you've been preparing for this without realizing it. All those adaptive techniques we've been working on, all that core strength training, all that precision landing practice, it's exactly what halo jumping requires." He pointed toward the specialized equipment. "And as for qualifications, I'm certified to conduct halo training for military contractors. As far as the paperwork is concerned, you're here for advanced civilian skydiving instruction." Falcon looked at the equipment, then at Webb, then at the darkening sky above them. "What exactly are you proposing?" Webb pulled out a tablet computer and showed Falcon a detailed briefing document. "There's a joint military exercise happening next week. Special operations units from multiple branches conducting insertion training in a classified location." He zoomed in on a map that showed terrain features and landing zones. "Intelligence has learned that enemy forces are planning to disrupt the exercise by targeting the insertion aircraft. Standard airborne procedures won't work because the aircraft will be under threat from surface-to-air missiles. Webb looked directly at Falcon. They need someone who can conduct a halo insertion from extreme altitude, navigate through hostile airspace using advanced techniques, and land precisely in a confined area under combat conditions. Falcon stared at the briefing materials, hardly believing what she was seeing. Marcus, are you telling me that there's an actual military operation that requires the kind of jump you're describing? I'm telling you that there's an operation that requires skills that most paratroopers don't possess, but that you could develop if you're willing to push beyond the limitations that other people have placed on you. Webb showed her additional technical specifications that detailed the jump requirements. Insertion altitude, 30,000 feet. Free fall distance, 25,000 feet. Landing zone, 50 meters by 100 meters, surrounded by hostile forces. Weather conditions, night jump with minimal visibility. Falcon felt a mixture of terror and excitement as she processed the requirements. This wasn't just advanced parachuting. This was the kind of insertion that only the most elite special operations soldiers attempted. Marcus, even if I could learn the techniques, how would I get involved in an actual military operation? I'm still just a student in basic airborne school. Webb's smile was enigmatic. Let me worry about that part. Your job is to prove that you can make the jump. Over the next 5 days, Falcon underwent the most intensive parachuting training of her life. Webb introduced her to equipment and techniques that were decades ahead of what was taught in conventional airborne schools. She learned to use oxygen systems for high-altitude jumps, navigation equipment for precision landings, and specialized parachutes designed for military insertion operations. But more importantly, she learned that her physical limitations were actually advantages in halo jumping. Her reduced muscle mass in her left leg meant that she had better aerodynamic balance during free fall. Her compensatory core strength gave her superior control during parachute deployment, and her years of adaptive landing techniques made her more precise than jumpers who relied purely on physical strength. By the end of the week, Falcon was conducting jumps from altitudes above 20,000 feet with precision that impressed even Webb. Falcon, Webb said after her final training jump, you're ready for the real thing. The next morning, Falcon received orders that she didn't understand and couldn't question. She was to report to a classified location for special assignment duties that would take precedence over her airborne school training. When she arrived at the designated coordinates, she found herself at a military facility that didn't appear on any official maps. The aircraft on the tarmac were unmarked. The personnel wore no identifying insignia, and the entire operation had the feel of something that officially didn't exist. Captain Lisa Park, the mission commander, briefed Falcon on what she described as the most challenging insertion operation in recent military history. Rodriguez, Park said, pointing to a map that showed terrain features in extraordinary detail. We have a special operations team that's been compromised behind enemy lines. Standard extraction procedures have failed because enemy forces have deployed advanced air defense systems that make conventional aircraft operations impossible. Park zoomed in on a specific area of the map. The team is located here, in a valley surrounded by enemy positions. The only way to reach them is through a halo insertion that approaches from an unexpected vector and lands in a confined area that's barely large enough for a single parachute. Falcon studied the map, calculating approach angles and landing requirements. Ma'am, what's the insertion altitude? 30,000 feet. You'll be jumping from the edge of the stratosphere in conditions that will test every skill you've developed. Park pulled out additional briefing materials. Rodriguez, I'm going to be direct with you. This mission has been declined by 3 different special operations units because they consider it too dangerous. The jump profile exceeds the safety parameters that most elite soldiers are willing to accept. Falcon felt her pulse racing, but her voice remained steady. Ma'am, what makes you think I can accomplish something that special operations soldiers can't? Park's smile was slight, but genuine. Because you've been preparing for this mission your entire military career without realizing it. Every limitation you've overcome, every adaptive technique you've developed, every time you've proven that other people's assumptions about your capabilities were wrong, it's all been preparation for this moment. Park stood up and walked to a window that overlooked the mysterious aircraft on the tarmac. Rodriguez. Conventional paratroopers rely on physical strength and standard procedures. But this mission requires someone who can think beyond conventional limits, who can adapt to conditions that no training manual covers, and who can succeed when every reasonable person would expect failure. She turned back to Falcon. The question is, are you willing to attempt a jump that will either make you a legend or kill you in the attempt? Falcon looked at the briefing materials, at the impossible mission parameters, at the aircraft that would carry her to the edge of space for a jump that defied every safety protocol she had ever learned. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "when do we leave?" The flight to 30,000 feet took 45 minutes, climbing through layers of atmosphere until the curvature of the Earth became visible through the aircraft's windows. Falcon wore equipment that was unlike anything she had seen before, a specialized suit designed for high-altitude operations, oxygen systems that would keep her alive in the thin air, and a parachute system so advanced that it seemed more like science fiction than military equipment. As the aircraft approached the insertion point, Falcon ran through her mental checklist one final time. Exit the aircraft cleanly. Maintain stability during the initial phase of free fall. Navigate using GPS and visual references to reach the target area. Deploy the parachute at exactly the right altitude to avoid detection while maintaining enough height to reach the landing zone. Simple in theory. Potentially fatal if anything went wrong. 2 minutes, the jumpmaster called out, his voice barely audible over the roar of the aircraft's engines. Falcon moved to the door, looking down at a world that seemed impossibly far below. At 30,000 feet, the ground was barely visible, and the air outside the aircraft was so thin that it would be instantly fatal without her specialized equipment. 1 minute. Falcon gripped the sides of the aircraft door, feeling the familiar mixture of terror and excitement that preceded every jump. But this time, there was something else. A sense of destiny, as if everything in her life had been leading to this single moment. 30 seconds. Through her oxygen mask, Falcon could hear her own breathing, rapid but controlled. Her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. She had trained for this. She was ready. 10 seconds. The jumpmaster held up his hand, counting down with his fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Falcon stepped into the void. For the first few seconds, there was no sensation of falling, just the strange weightlessness of transition from the aircraft to free fall. Then the reality of her situation hit her with full force. She was falling through space at over 120 miles per hour, her specialized equipment functioning perfectly as she navigated through air so thin that conventional parachuting would be impossible. Through her heads-up display, Falcon could see her altitude decreasing rapidly. 29,000 feet, 28,000, 27,000. She had to maintain perfect stability while monitoring her GPS navigation system and preparing for a parachute deployment at exactly the right moment. At 25,000 feet, Falcon encountered the first unexpected challenge. Weather conditions at high altitude were creating turbulence that threatened to destabilize her free fall. Conventional paratroopers would have deployed their parachutes immediately to regain control, but Falcon had trained for exactly this situation. Using techniques that Webb had taught her, she adjusted her body position to work with the turbulence rather than fighting against it, maintaining her trajectory toward the target area while continuing her descent. At 20,000 feet, she encountered the second challenge. Enemy radar installations were scanning the airspace with patterns that could detect a deployed parachute, forcing her to delay her planned parachute deployment and continue free falling to a lower altitude. This was the kind of adaptive decision-making that separated elite paratroopers from conventional soldiers. Falcon calculated the risks in real time, determining that she could safely continue free fall until 5,000 feet, an altitude so low that most military parachutists would consider it suicidal. At 5,000 feet, Falcon deployed her parachute with precision that would have impressed her airborne school instructors. The specialized canopy opened perfectly, giving her the control she needed to navigate the final phase of her descent while remaining below enemy radar detection. But the most challenging part of the jump was still ahead. The landing zone was a clearing barely 50 meters wide, surrounded by enemy positions and obstacles that would destroy any parachute that missed the target area by even a few yards. Falcon had to thread the needle between trees, rocks, and hostile forces, while landing with precision that exceeded anything taught in military training. Using navigation techniques that combined GPS guidance with visual references, Falcon guided her parachute through a descent path that was mathematically perfect. She avoided detection by enemy forces, cleared all obstacles, and touched down in the exact center of the landing zone with a landing so soft that it barely disturbed the ground. As she gathered her parachute and activated her emergency beacon, Falcon heard voices approaching through the darkness. American voices, calling out recognition signals that identified them as the special operations team she had been sent to support. "Who the hell are you?" asked a voice in the shadows, and Falcon could see the silhouette of a soldier approaching with weapon ready. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Falcon replied, using the recognition codes she had been given. "I'm your extraction support." The soldier stepped into the moonlight, revealing the insignia of a Special Forces captain. His expression was a mixture of amazement and disbelief. "Rodriguez, we were told that extraction support was impossible because of the air defense situation. How the hell did you get here?" Falcon smiled, feeling the satisfaction of having accomplished something that everyone had said was impossible. "I jumped, sir." The Special Forces captain stared at her for a moment, then shook his head in amazement. "Rodriguez, what you just did, that was a halo insertion from 30,000 feet into a combat zone with precision landing in a confined area. That's not just impressive, that's impossible." "Apparently not, sir." Over the next hour, as Falcon coordinated with the Special Operations team to plan their extraction, she learned the full scope of what she had accomplished. The jump she had just completed was being described by the mission commanders as the most technically demanding parachute insertion in military history. But more importantly, her successful insertion had made possible the extraction of a special operations team whose intelligence gathering had prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed thousands of American civilians. When Falcon finally returned to Fort Benning 3 days later, she found that her reputation had preceded her. Word of her accomplishment had spread to the military parachuting community with a speed that only truly extraordinary achievements can generate. Chief Warrant Officer Thompson was waiting for her at the Airborne School headquarters, his expression completely different from the contempt he had shown just days earlier. "Rodriguez," Thompson said, his voice carrying respect that hadn't been there before. "I owe you an apology, and I owe you an explanation." Thompson gestured for her to sit down in his office. "Rodriguez, what you accomplished on that classified mission, that wasn't just exceptional parachuting. That was the kind of achievement that gets studied in military academies and talked about in special operations circles for decades." Thompson pulled out a folder marked with security classifications that Falcon had never seen before. "Rodriguez, I've been instructed to inform you that your performance has attracted attention at the highest levels of military command. There are opportunities available to you that most soldiers never even know exist." Falcon remained silent, unsure what Thompson was leading up to. "Rodriguez, how would you feel about joining a special operations unit that specializes in high-altitude insertion techniques? A unit that conducts missions so classified that their existence is known only to a handful of senior officers." Falcon felt her heart racing as she processed the implications of what Thompson was offering. "Sir, what kind of missions?" Thompson's smile was slight but genuine. "The kind of missions that require soldiers who can do the impossible. The kind of missions that save lives and protect national security in ways that the public never learns about. He leaned forward. Rodriguez, conventional soldiers follow procedures and hope for the best. Elite soldiers adapt procedures to meet mission requirements. But the soldiers we're talking about, they create new procedures when the mission requires capabilities that don't exist yet. Thompson stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the airborne training areas where new soldiers were learning to overcome their fears of jumping from aircraft. Rodriguez, what you've proven is that limitations can become advantages if you're willing to work harder and think differently than everyone else. That's exactly the kind of thinking that special operations units need. He turned back to Falcon. The question is, are you ready to take on missions that will make what you just accomplished look like basic training? Falcon looked at the folder of classified materials, at the man who had once told her she would never be a paratrooper, at the opportunity to join the most elite soldiers in the military. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the excitement she felt. "When do I start?" 2 years later, the techniques that Falcon Rodriguez had developed for adaptive parachuting had been incorporated into the training programs for multiple special operations units. Her methods for compensating for physical limitations have been adapted for use by soldiers with various injuries and disabilities, opening up special operations careers for personnel who had previously been considered unfit for elite military service. But perhaps more importantly, Falcon's story had become an inspiration for soldiers throughout the military who had been told that their limitations disqualified them from achieving their goals. The jump that everyone said was impossible had not only saved a special operations team, it had proven that the most dangerous assumptions in military service were the assumptions about what was possible and who was capable of achieving it. Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had been promoted and assigned to develop new parachuting techniques for special operations forces, often told Falcon's story to soldiers who were struggling with their own limitations. The lesson of Falcon Rodriguez, Thompson would say, isn't that disabled soldiers can become paratroopers. It's that soldiers who learn to adapt and overcome are often more capable than soldiers who rely purely on physical advantages. Rodriguez proved that preparation, determination, and innovative thinking can overcome limitations that seem insurmountable. But more than that, she proved that the military's most valuable asset isn't perfect soldiers. It's soldiers who refuse to accept that perfection is required. And somewhere in a classified facility conducting missions that officially didn't exist, a former airborne school reject was planning jumps from altitudes that most people couldn't even imagine, proving every day that the most dangerous thing in the world might be someone who has been underestimated. Because sometimes the person who isn't supposed to be able to do something is exactly the person who figures out how to do it better than anyone else ever has. The instructors had told her she would never make it through airborne school. They had been wrong about that, and about everything else they thought they knew about what was possible when determination met preparation and courage met opportunity. Falcon Rodriguez hadn't just learned to jump from aircraft. She had learned to fly.